All right, we talked about physical aggression, we talked about social aggression. We're going to roll into the last segment for this unit, and that is bullying. So Dan Olowius was the first person to really try and define bullying, and it was defined as intentional and repeated aggression within a power imbalance. Some of this has been criticized in the decades since his work. For instance, does bullying always need to be repeated? Could one really traumatic episode of bullying be enough to qualify? And does bullying have to happen within a power imbalance? Is it possible to bully someone who has power over you? Can you bully your boss? Can you bully your professor? Can you bully a public figure? And so that becomes up for discussion nowadays, but that was the original definition. Now within bullying, there are a couple subtypes. These subtypes are not what I would call congruent. I just want to point out the fact that when we first started looking at bullying, we were mainly studying physical bullying with physical aggression. Then it came to be understood, okay, well, you can also bully people with your words and hurt your feelings. So then people started to study verbal aggression. Then with the work by Crick and Underwood on social aggression, we started to look at how you could do social bullying. And then as text messaging and the internet became more prevalent, we started to study cyberbullying. Now in 2020, we can look at these four categories of physical, verbal, social, and cyber and say they aren't the best way to break down bullying, because a lot of what happens on cyberbullying could be verbal. You could send an insult, and social aggression, verbal can be nested within social aggression. So these categories are not the best, but they are the categories we still see used most commonly in the research. Now, in terms of when bullying peaks, it tends to peak around when social aggression peaks. And so when we look at bullying, it's important to understand when we look at the prevalence of physical aggression, which peaks in young toddlerhood, and we look at the prevalence of social aggression, which peaks in junior high, bullying is much more in line with social aggression in that it peaks in junior high. We can see here on this chart, previously, I used to make charts like this all the time when I'm doing bullying reports for different provinces in Canada, and the charts would follow a pattern similar to this depending on the year and the school and the province. But we would find that physical bullying would be the least prevalent. We would find that verbal bullying would be the most prevalent, with social and cyber falling in the middle. And how we would get this would be through a self-report from the students, how often have you bullied someone, how often have you been bullied, and based on these four categories. So these would be considered different categories. Certainly somebody could click off if they were verbally attacked online, which hurt their feelings, they might want to click on all verbal, social, and cyber all at once. So it could vary based on person to person. But we definitely see the physicals less often, verbals more often, and we can see that it has this huge peak around grade 9, around age 15. So this is when we see the peak for social aggression as well. So it's important to understand, even though we're more physically aggressive at younger ages, we're not necessarily doing more physical bullying at those ages. We tend to do more physical bullying in junior high. And that's because at younger ages we might be doing physical aggression, but it's not targeted, intentional, repeated bullying within a power differential. So it's not fitting into that definition of bullying. All right, so now we're going to talk about the characters within the bullying situation. So we're going to start off by talking about the bully. And so kids who are the bully more often, or as I like to say, who do bullying behavior more often. We know that everyone can bully someone at some point in their lives. It's not a dichotomy, you're a bully or not a bully. I like to think about it as you're higher in bullying behavior or you're lower in bullying behavior. So the kids that tend to be higher in bullying behavior, well, they tend to show higher levels of externalized coping. That is, they do escalation techniques. They use physical aggression or social aggression to take it out on other people. And so what we find is that's how they deal with things. Now, surprisingly so, kids that have higher prevalences of bullying behavior are not necessarily lower in self-regulation, and they're not necessarily lower in social competence. In fact, we find bullies can be spread across the gamut. You can have bullies that are medium, low, high in self-regulation, medium, low, high in social competence. So there's lots of diversity in there. Where you definitely start to find the commonalities, though, is kids who bully more often are at a greater risk for more delinquent behaviors as they get older, and they are at a greater risk for things like conduct disorders. For kids that are extremely high in bullying behavior, we're worried about them in terms of their substance use, and we're worried about they might develop severe mood disorders or personality disorders. So being the bully is not a good spot to be. Now, of course, being the victim, not a good spot to be either. And we know that we can all be victimized at one point in time, and we know there's a lot of politicized language around victims versus survivors of bullies. But for kids who are often placed in the victim role in an encounter more often, we find those kids are at a greater risk for emotional problems, such as having high levels of anxiety, higher levels of depression. If they're more on the receiving end of a bullying behavior, more often we also tend to find they're higher in loneliness and they might have a lower self-esteem. They may develop many fearful cognitive pathways, find a negative cognitive bias where they're constantly paranoid the worst is going to happen. Now, sometimes we can have individuals that bully quite frequently and are victimized quite frequently. And in the literature, these kids are referred to as the bully-victim, the bully victim. And bully victims are the most at risk for developmental negative outcomes. These are the kids we're definitely worried about. These are kids that are receiving a lot of bullying and also delivering a lot of bullying, and there's just a lot of negative stuff happening in their life. So we are definitely concerned about the bully victim the most. Then on the sidelines of the altercation, we have the bystanders. And bystanders can play lots of different roles. We have the bystanders, which are definitely a problem, and they're the instigators. They're the ones cheering it on and encouraging something to happen. They're the kids that if there's a schoolyard fight, they stand around and they cheer. Or if somebody is excluding them, they encourage them to exclude them, encourage the rumors. Maybe they didn't make up the rumor, but they spread it. Maybe they aren't the one that originally shared the negative picture on the internet, but they shared the negative picture and they laughed about it. And they told someone that was funny. And so these bystanders can really make the bullying situation much worse. We also have the bystanders that don't necessarily encourage, but they're apathetic. They stand around and watch and just ignore it. They're a problem too, because they normalize it. They make people think that they can keep going about it. If we think about people that are not racist versus people that are anti-racist, not being racist is not good enough. That's letting racism happen right in front of you and not saying or doing anything about it. So where we want to be with bystanders is we want to be in that third category where we interrupt and we do things like calling out or consoling. Or for better language on this, I like to go to some bystander training slides, 5 positive things that bystanders can do that are more positive than just standing by. One of them is distract. This is when if somebody's harassing another person on transit, let's say, you don't approach the harasser, but you just try and change the conversation. Hey, anybody know where this stop is? Can you help me find this? You can pretend to be naive, just change the topic, just try and diffuse the situation and distract everyone who's involved. You can delegate. If you are afraid for your own safety, you can do something on transit. Let's say you can text the emergency line or you can press the help bar. You can report the event to the authorities and stand behind the scenes if you are afraid to get involved. The third one is to document. This is the idea that you record the event that's going on. And this is important. If we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, this has been essential. The person who recorded the death of George Floyd was a very important bystander who kicked off a huge revolution. Now that bystander has been criticized. If they could stand around and record, why couldn't they get in the middle? But it's important to understand that for your own safety, you don't have to put yourself in danger to be a good bystander. Documenting it and getting help is important enough. You can also delay. If you don't want to jump in while the harasser's there, you can delay, wait till they leave the transit area, and then you can go and support the victim and say, I'm sorry that happened to you. Do you need any help? You can do it afterwards. And that's still being a good bystander. So maybe you can't break up a physical altercation, but afterwards you're going to call the ambulance for someone, or afterwards you're going to help them out. And then there's the most active bystander one, and this is the most high risk. This is when you confront the harasser head on. This is when you say this is not acceptable and you actually get in the middle and break it up. So it's important to understand when we talk about bystander training, a lot of times people assume we're talking about that fifth direct one where you jump in the middle with your hands in the air in the middle of a fight and you say no, 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 no. It doesn't always have to look like that to be a good bystander. So we know bullying's bad and we know we want to stop it. But how do we do that? In my lifetime, the way that we've approached bullying has drastically changed. And that is thanks to the works of Wendy Craig and Deborah Pepler, 2 Ontario developmental psychologists who have drastically changed how schools and communities and families respond to bullying. Through the PrevNet, or Promoting Relationships and Eliminating Violence network, we've really revolutionized how we think about how to respond to bullying. And that's been through a bit of a tiered way that we've approached it, through school-wide, small group targeted, and individual responsive interventions and prevention strategies. So in terms of school-wide prevention strategies, some of the work by PrevNet has suggested changing our school policies and changing how we discipline people, moving to a more progressive discipline. We know that the zero tolerance policy was not great, but moving towards policies that really establish school as a safe place. Changing the social norms, changing how teachers talk about bullying. I know when I was growing up, there was teachers that actually encouraged and were instigators in bullying situations. So making sure that educators are trained about the dangers of bullying and about the harm that can realistically happen to both victims and the bully. And so changing the school climate, so doing things like school climate surveys to kind of get a measuring stick of how kids are feeling and if they're not feeling safe at school. So this is one of the really good ones. So you want to change everything for everybody in a school-wide approach. That being said, you know there'll be some kids that are more at risk of being a bully, more at risk of being a victim. So with these groups, you want to do targeted prevention strategies. And one of the targeted prevention strategies that I like to talk about is the work by Tina Daniels working with the Girl Guides of Canada. So doing large workshops with a select group of people, so preteen girls who are in Girl Guides. It's not a whole school-wide approach, but it's more targeted, and teaching them about positive relationship skills and social skills training and social emotional learning in general. And this is the idea that then you have kids in smaller groups learning how to be leaders, learning how to be strong friends, learning about how sometimes the types of relationships they might see in other places are not ideal, and that's not the model they should be striving towards. So this target prevention can really help if you pick groups that are going to be at a slightly higher risk. And then once there is an incidence of bullying, responding to that in a progressive way. And so what this is one-on-one counseling to teach coping skills or to teach social skills to the bully, restorative justice between the bully and the victim, explaining and training and explaining why it's wrong, and not just coming down in a harsh punitive way. There's an educational element to this and understanding why the bully did these things and what was the catalyst to it, rather than just looking at a punishment. And so certainly bullying is not a problem we have solved by any means, but we have seen schools address bullying revolutionized in the last few decades. And so with that, we're now at the end of Unit 4 on aggression. Thanks very much.